What's up, YouTube? Mark Abram here with the Resistance Barbell Club. Today we're bringing you a video with Julia Taylor. She has a degree in exercise physiology. She's going to do glute training with you guys today. She's going to be working out with Lauren. It's going to be a great video. She's got a lot to teach. She also has a very successful Instagram. We'll put her link at the bottom. You guys check it out.
Hi guys, my name is Julia Taylor and I have Lauren here with me. And we're going to take you through a glute workout. So of course we always start our glute days with hip thrust. The reason why we're going to start off with hip thrust rather than squats or anything of the sort is because you fatigue a lot faster when you're putting your glutes in the shortened position, whereas you still save a little bit of energy when you're putting your glutes in a lengthening position such as a squat, deadlift, lunge, something like that. So we're always going to start off with our shortening movements, compounds first, go into lengthening compound movements, and then go into shortening single leg or more isolation movements, and then go into lengthening isolation movements as well. So we're going to start off with just 3 to 5 reps for our warm-up. For this program that I'm doing, you always want to program for like 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes people do 4, that's totally fine. I like to keep it a little bit longer because I do like to increase my strength. When I start to kind of fatigue or feel like I can't really go up in weight, kind of plateauing, then that's when I'll change the program again. However, I'm always going to start with hip thrust as my first compound movement for my glute days, so I'll just change the variation. Some variations I'll do is I will put like a step up where my feet are. Another variation is I'll do a 3-second hold at the top. Another variation is I'll do 3-second hold for kind of like 6 to 8 reps and then immediately go into kind of pulses, 6 to 8 reps again. The hip thrust variation I'm doing for this program is going to be knee banded, and then what I'll do on my actual working set, because this is my warm-ups, I will do hip abduction while I'm waiting. Last time I did hip thrust, last leg day, today is Wednesday, so on Monday when I did it, because I always do glutes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I stick for 3 days a week. You can always do 2 days a week and just have a little bit higher volume on those days, or you can spread it out into 3 days. It's really preference and whatever works for you and your schedule and seeing how your body reacts to it. Last leg day, I did 25 on top of this and a 5. And I did it for 12 reps. So this time I am going to increase because I don't really want to go over 12 reps because that's kind of high for what I'm about to do. So I am going to just increase by 5 pounds on each side. You can do 5 pounds total and put a 2.5 on, or you could go heavier depending on how your warm-ups felt and how it felt last time. So I'm going to do this, and since I am going up by 10 pounds, I'm going to go for somewhere around like 8 reps. If I feel like it's too easy, then I'm going to go for more because obviously you want to push yourself, but let's go. I ended up getting 12. I actually feel like I can go up from that. I did eat a lot of food yesterday and Monday, so definitely am feeling those extra calories. Moral of the story is you always want to try to go up or increase your reps, weight, or just improve your form some way, somehow. You always want to keep, you can't really see it too much because of her jacket, but you always want to keep a posterior pelvic tilt, so your head kind of tucked, and almost like think about tucking your butt under like this and just squeezing your glutes. And then instead of just kind of going through the motion, you really want to think about squeezing your glutes at the top and making sure you reach full lockout. I notice a lot of people that will kind of just go through the motion and they won't reach full lockout and they'll be just kind of underneath it. You need to drop the weight. You need to get a full squeeze because the most important part of this movement is reaching full lockout and getting that full squeeze at the top, and that's where the most tension is, at the top. So last thing I want to talk about is getting into the Smith machine. The reason why I prefer the Smith machine over a barbell. So it was very easy for her to get underneath it. It's also very easy to kind of set up where the bench is and placement because you're starting at almost full lockout to the point where you can see how far the bench really needs to be away, and then you can kind of adjust your feet. So the next reason why I also prefer the Smith machine over a barbell is it's a lot easier to start your hip thrust, whereas when you're on the floor with the barbell, when you try to get up off the bench, usually the bench is too high and you kind of have to use your elbows to get up. I've had experiences, I've had clients, I've had just people tell me in general that they have kind of lower back pain when they try to do that, because you're kind of trying to like push it up before you even start the hip thrust. So it can kind of limit the amount of weight you can do. Another reason that I also prefer the Smith machine is it takes out that stabilization aspect. A lot of gyms don't have like a shorter bar that's got the longer part where you can fit enough plates on, because the shorter bars are less weight. So the problem is when you are someone who can lift a lot of weight and you go from a 45-pound bar to a 25-pound bar, you obviously need to add more plates to it. So you can only fit a certain amount of plates on there. So with this, you can load it, take out the stabilization aspect, really focus on the squeeze at the top and get really good hypertrophy that way. And then last thing is, this is a little life hack. I wrap 2 hip thrust pads rather than just having 1 hip thrust pad. I notice a lot of people, when they're going to do hip thrust, they can feel like they can lock out. It's not the weight that's heavy, but it feels like the bar is kind of digging into their hips, and that's limiting why they can't lock out. So kind of putting 2 pads there eliminates that, the pain and everything, and you can still lift to your full potential, and you can kind of get more glute gains that way by reaching full lockout, not having any pain, and really reaching your max potential of weight. We're doing a drop set. I'm going first with the drop set. This is totally optional. I just personally like to do it because I like to leave my first like 3 working sets for super heavy, and then I just like to do kind of 1 drop set at the very end, just kind of like, I like to call it like a burnout, if that makes sense. Even though it's at the beginning of your exercise, or your workout, I should say, I just personally like to do it to kind of fatigue those glutes a little bit more and get that better mind to muscle connection in the glutes for the rest of the workout. Your glutes are predominantly slow twitch fibers. They're almost like 50-50, but they're predominantly more slow twitch, so doing kind of a higher rep range is really good for them. My philosophy is kind of doing both rep ranges, doing a low rep range and doing a high rep range, so you can kind of hit all muscle fiber types and really get the most out of your glute workout. So I like to do strong, less reps, stay on anything under 12, and then I do the high reps at the end for the very last ones. So we're gonna get in it. I'm going to do 12 reps, and then I'm gonna drop, keep my hips up and just my knees bent, and I'm gonna go in and out, and I'm gonna go 20. She's gonna take the 25-pound weight off. And once again, you can do whatever kind of weight you want. You could start off with just like 3 25s and go from there, just 3 10s, whatever is kind of, you want to base it similar to what your working set is, but to be light enough that at the beginning it's not extremely hard and you feel like, oh, this is going to be easy, and then when you get to the last set you're like, oh my god, my hips will literally not go up because it's so hard, because you're reaching almost failure or you're actually reaching failure. I'm going to do the 20 in and outs while she takes the 25 off, and then I'm going to go immediately again, do 12 again, and then I'm gonna do the band again. She's gonna take the 35 off, and then the last one, I'm gonna do the 45. I'm gonna go for as many reps as I can go, drop it, and then I'm going to do the in and out for the last time, and then it's her turn.
Yay.
Take it off. So notice how my hips aren't touching the floor, but I'm going in and out. There's a million different ways you can do a drop set. I could just kind of be holding it up in the air without even racking it, and she could be taking the weight off, a bunch of different kinds of ways. But this is the one that we're doing for this program. So notice how I'm never getting a break. So my glutes are already burning really bad. So this last one should be torturous. Last one.
Yep.
My glutes are already on fire. The hurtful face is optional.
Yep.
It's not gonna go up anymore.
Okay.
That's it.
Yep. Nice.
Oh my god. Oh my god, they're not moving. Yeah, the idea is to feel like you physically cannot move anymore and still try to push past that until you physically can't really go up or reach lockout. My glutes are on fire. I feel like SpongeBob in that meme where he's got the bones just sticking out of his butt. That's me right now. You feel the SpongeBob?
Yeah.
Oh, my butt. It's like, no, it's funny because when you go from hip thrusts to squats and you do your first, you like feel, I don't know how to describe it, but you feel that like that butt stretch. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like right where your glute ham tie-in is, you just feel that stretch because it was just so tight from the hip thrust. So what you guys saw me doing a moment ago, kind of like doing this little calf stretch, I do not have any dorsiflexion, which dorsiflexion is the amount your toe can kind of bend this way, or I can bend this way, if that makes sense. So this is dorsi, this is planar flexion. So dorsiflexion, I lack it. My physical therapist actually tells me to do a static stretch prior. So static just means you sit there and hold a stretch. So something I like to do for that is this. It kind of stretches out my calves or my dorsiflexion a little bit so that when I squat, I have a better squat. So some things that you may notice when you do lack dorsiflexion is you're not having the ability for your knees to go over your toes. So you might have like a butt wink, if that makes sense. So a lot of times when people do this, I can kind of show you, it's like, so if I don't allow my knees to go over my toes, it'll kind of look like this, where my butt kind of dips and rounds in, if that makes sense. So it kind of goes shoot, and then goes up. So it shoot, like shifts with your pelvis. So one way to help kind of fix this, drive your knees over toes. If you do lack that dorsiflexion, either wear squat shoes, bi-squat shoes that have slightly elevated heel. You can put some sort of plate underneath your calves. Just try to stretch your dorsiflexion so you can kind of get out of that. One thing that I also do, which this may be different for you, this may be different for Joe Smo, whoever it is, but one thing I like to do is I actually start off my squat, because I am squatting a little bit of a low bar rather than high bar. High bar, you're gonna be standing upright, where low bar, you're gonna be leaned forward a little bit. So I actually start off my squat with my butt back a little bit, so it kind of causes me to shift my weight slightly forward and my knees go over my toes more. But that's not to say that you need to do that. If you really have a question about that because you feel like something's hurting, it's pinching, whatever it may be, I'd say definitely talk to your physical therapist about it, or find a physical therapist and talk to them about it. Or maybe find like a really experienced personal trainer. But be careful with that because not all the time it's good. But one thing to note is there's no perfect squat. Everybody's squat is going to be different because everybody's anatomy is different. I may have longer femurs than her, but we may be the exact same height. So something like that, where I have longer femurs, she may have shorter femurs, it's going to differ of how much you're leaning forward versus standing upright, and how you have a higher, more upright squat, whereas you're leaning over more low bar squat and only can squat to, like, let's say parallel without losing form. So there is no ideal perfect squat because everybody's anatomy is going to be different. So that's one thing to take into account. She also is wearing the band around her knees because due to an injury in the past, she shifts her weight slightly to what, your left, right?
Left.
Yep, so her left. So the best way for her to do this to kind of fix that problem is to put the band around her knees and focus on driving her knees outwards. So it kind of focuses on like activating her glutes, using her glutes a little bit more, firing them so that she kind of stays even. And if you do have an injury, once again, always talk to your physical therapist about it before doing any exercise. And don't take, I don't want to say don't take advice from this, but don't say that you're the same as her. So we're doing a glute focused lunge, and the difference between a glute focused lunge and a traditional lunge is a traditional lunge, you're gonna stay upright a lot more, and you're gonna have almost 90 and 90. And once again, more upright, not as much bend in your hips. And another way to do it to make it a little bit more quad focused if you wanted to, just push that front foot back a little bit more so you have more knee bend right here. A glute focus lunge, you're gonna have that 9D because you want less quad focus. The less bend in the knee, the less quad it is. More bend in the knee, more quad. It's gonna go same thing for hips. More bend in the hips, meaning sorry, I'm gonna bring out geometry, but a more acute angle is gonna be more glute focused, whereas the more 90 degree you are, it's once again not gonna be as much glute. So you wanna think about almost leaning over slightly. If I switch my legs, you can kind of see it a little bit more. So this is gonna be 90, so I have less quad, but I'm gonna be leaning forward a lot more. So I have more bend here, greater stretch on my lower glutes right there. So you could also do a combination of a more glute quad, or more glute and quad focus, where you just scoot this back, but you're still having that bend. So you have more acute angle, so good, a lot of knee bend, a lot of hip bend. And that's gonna be both quads and glutes. It's really just preference on what you wanna do. And then what you wanna do as you're going through it, focus on driving through this front heel. And the reason that I prefer to do these on the Smith machine rather than a barbell, like I always prefer barbell squats, but the reason why I prefer to do these on a Smith machine, you can kind of get that better mind to muscle connection, and once again, not have to worry about stabilization because the bar is very big and you kind of have to worry about where am I going. And you could of course do them with dumbbells. I just feel like with dumbbells, you have a limiting factor of your grip. Of course, you can use like the wrist grips or hand grips, which will help tremendously. I just feel like axial loaded, meaning loaded on your back, is going to be the most beneficial way where you can really progressive overload and do a higher weight and really focus on that mind to muscle connection. So I feel like Smith machine is the way to go for those.
Okay, so I'm lining my foot up where I know my placement is, but it kind of can take you a while. So once again, just play around with that foot placement, but I want around 90 degrees on that front knee. My hips are back, so it's behind this bar where the bar path is, and I'm just going down and up. And as far as foot placement for this, it's whatever feels comfortable. You don't want to be all the way out here where you're a squat and you're really bent over. You just want that hips back and slight more bend, because notice how while I'm here, I could always shift my hips forward and do a lunge this way to the point where it's more quad focused. So I'm not bent over a huge amount, but just enough so I have a good angle on my hips. And then one thing I also want to note, I'm not extremely tucked with my chin, but I'm not looking at the sky either and having something that you call a turtleneck. So my head is basically in line with my spine, which is something you always want when you squat, deadlift, anything of the sort. You always want, unless you're hip thrusting you want to be a little bit more tucked because you want a posterior pelvic tilt. With this, you want a neutral spine. I always like to do the saying, where your head goes, your spine follows. So if you're looking to the left, your hips and spine will shift to the left. If you're looking to the right, same thing. So I always like to kind of just keep it neutral. I don't like to stare at one thing, because if I notice I stare at that one thing, my head's gonna bobble a little bit, and I don't want that. Something I tell a lot of clients or people to do is just close your eyes. Just put your head neutral where it feels like it's just kind of resting patiently. Close your eyes and just really focus on squeezing that glute to pull you up. Sometimes people feel like they need to look in the mirror. Problem is, when you're all the way down in that lunge and your hips are back so you're leaned over, you're gonna be like this and looking up like a creepy person. So you don't wanna be there, because then your chin's gonna be up. So lunges are our third movement. Lunges are technically a compound movement. So compound movements consist of movements where you're using multiple muscles rather than just in isolation where you're using predominantly like one, maybe two muscles. Glutes are super hard to isolate considering where they are on your body. So like quads, for example, you can easily isolate those by doing a leg extension. Glutes are a little bit more tricky. You're always going to use a little bit of quad or hamstring when you're using your glutes. Unless you're doing some sort of band work where you're doing abduction, something like that. But even then, you would work your piriformis. So they're super hard to completely isolate, but this would be our third compound movement. You can always do something like RDLs as well. This is going to put your glutes in a stretch position. If you notice when you go down, her glutes are completely lengthened at the bottom, and then she goes up. The peak tension on this one is going to be right at the bottom. It's when it's the hardest. You always want to start off with the shortening range of motion where they're the hardest, and then go into the lengthening range of motion for your glutes, because it is a lot harder and your glutes fatigue a lot faster in the shortened range versus the lengthened. But the reason we're going to do this second is because, once again, it's a compound movement, and even though it's a single leg, you're using about an 80-20 split, so it's not a complete single leg, it's still a compound. You're still using that back leg. This is our third exercise. Once again, RDLs would also count as something like that. A deadlift, you can either replace your squat with that, or you could do that as your third compound. I always like to have at least one single leg movement, if not maybe two. I personally prefer to have one single leg movement as a lengthening and one single leg movement as a shortening, but that is totally preference to you. You don't have to do that. So although this is a compound, like I said, you are working one leg predominantly more than the other. So this would be my single leg lengthening movement, and then we're going to go into a B stance hip thrust after this, and that's going to be my single leg shortening movement right after. Another example of a single leg shortening movement could be like a kickback, a donkey kick. Instead of a B stance hip thrust, it could be like just a completely single leg hip thrust. There's a lot more, but I can only think of those at the time. So we're about to do a B stance hip thrust, also known as like a staggered stance. You can do a single leg. I just personally like B stance. I feel like I can go a bit heavier and I feel them more. Sometimes when I do an absolute like single leg, like I'm here, my leg is completely out and I'm here, I'll actually feel it a little bit in my hamstring, in like my inner part of my hamstring, like right there. So it's not my favorite exercise. I feel like I also can't load it as much, but some people, they prefer that. Another actual way to do a single leg, rather than just kind of have your leg out, is put your ankle here. But I do notice some people, it causes them to get a cramp. They get like a cramp right here. Glute med, glute minimus type thing. Sometimes people get a cramp in that. I don't always experience it, but I know some people do, so I can't really pinpoint it, but you're just going like this. And once again, you have the bar here. You can have a dumbbell here and just hold the dumbbell. My foot's a little close, but 90 degrees with your knee and just kind of going like that. Same exact thing, or you're here, going here. I just personally don't feel those the most in my glutes, so it's not something I do, but I know some people do. Sometimes maybe I'll start with that when I'm doing a single leg variation and then go on to B stance hip thrust. It's really just based on preference. So with B stance, you're gonna be, or staggered stance, it's the same thing, just different name. So you're gonna be, this one is gonna be where your knee is gonna be at 90 degrees. Your other foot is going to be slightly forward and on your heel. So this is gonna be 80-20. So 80% of the load is gonna be on this leg and 20% is this, just kind of staying there, using as stability and stuff like that. So when you're going, you're focusing on squeezing with this. And since this one is farther and you're on your heel, maybe this hip will be shifted down slightly. You want to kind of keep them even as much as possible because you don't want a twisted spine, but you just want to focus on squeezing with this glute and this leg. So another alternative you can do for the single leg hip thrust, B stance, whatever it is, you can always add like a little platform there, whatever it is, to make it a little bit more of a glute bridge. Or you could always do them on the floor. I've seen people, they'll go here and they're here, legs up in the air, same thing going like this, or here, and then you have like a dumbbell here. It's not super ideal with the dumbbell there because it kind of goes in your stomach a little bit, but I see people do it all the time. The only reason I'm just doing this in this program, but sometimes they'll do kickbacks. Just kickbacks, I feel like with the cables, I can't go super heavy on, and I feel like with this, like I can go a lot heavier on. And the only reason I'm doing this, even though I already did hip thrust earlier in my program, is just to get that kind of fix any imbalances. So I just make sure that I am doing both legs and I'm hitting both legs evenly, because even though you may be on a Smith machine, you still can kind of take over with one glute. A lot of people just like your right leg dominant or whatever it is. One glute may be a little bit more dominant and slightly bigger. So you always want to just have at least one single leg movement. Like I said, I prefer to have two, one shortening, one lengthening. I always like to have at least one single leg movement so I fix any imbalances. There wasn't really a name for this in the past, but I think this started kind of forming more so recently, or maybe it always was a name and just more so people started preaching about it now, but more of a cast glute bridge where you're doing not going as far down. So you're only going about halfway. So instead of going all the way down to here with a traditional hip thrust and then going all the way up like that, you're only going down to about here and then going up. And the reason for this is because if you go down any more, you're just gonna add a lot more bend into your quad and your knee. So you're gonna work your quad a little bit more rather than your glutes. Whole point of hip thrust is to work your glutes. And so I don't personally like going down all the way. Like I said earlier, the most important part of the hip thrust is at the top. So what you want to focus on always is not that you're going down all the way, but that you're going up all the way. And this is not to say that you should have no range of motion. You should not do something like this where you're going like this and you're only doing like a little pulse. You should 100% go down, but I'm just saying you don't have to go all the way down to here. Last exercise, I always save this for last because it's working predominantly your glute medius and glute minimus, and that's smaller and weaker than your glute max. So it's going to be any type of lateral movement or abduction movement. So you could do the hip abductor machine, you could do cables, and you could do like lateral kicks, like something like that, where you hook your ankle on there and the cable's coming from right here and you're going that way. You could do a glute medius focused kickback where you're facing the cables now and you're just kicking around 45 degrees, so not straight back. That's gonna work more your glute max. Whereas if you kick a little bit more to the side, it's gonna be more glute medius right here. One thing I also want to note is a lot of people think that doing stuff like that, any type of lateral movement or whatever it is, and working your glute medius is gonna get rid of this hip dip right there, which is not the case. It'll actually make it more prominent, and it's not something to be worried about at all or self-conscious of. If you look at basic glute anatomy, the glutes naturally have that little dip in your hip. The only reason why some women might not have hip dips and some women won't is going to be where they carry fat and their current body fat percentage, because you may have someone that's super lean but they still don't have hip dips, and that's just because they carry fat more predominantly maybe in their hips or in their glutes, where some people also carry it in their arms or their stomach, wherever it may be. And then you have women that may not be as lean and they may have it because once again maybe they're a little bit leaner on that part, whereas they carry more of their fat around their abdominals or wherever it may be. It really just depends on, once again, your anatomy, your genetics, where you hold fat, where you don't hold fat. So it's not something to be self-conscious of, and it's actually something to kind of be like, hey, like, kudos to me, because when you do see those, it just means you're a little bit leaner. So now I'm going to do lateral band walks. You can continue and just do multiple steps, or you can go back and forth, whichever one you really prefer. I'm putting this around my feet because research actually shows that when you do put the band around your feet, it's actually going to have more glute activation, whereas putting it around your ankles or your knees, which is interesting because I used to always think before this research came out that I felt my glutes more on when I put it right above my knee. My ankles, I didn't really feel at all. And then when I actually started putting it around my feet, I noticed a huge difference, and a huge difference on where it was placed, because when I would put it around my knees and I would just kind of squat down and do back and forth, which I'm about to show you, I think that I was just feeling my glute max by just physically squatting, and I wasn't actually feeling the movement, whereas here I'm really focusing and I'm using my glute medius and glute minimus. So what you're going to do is we're going to do two different variations of this. This one is going to be leaning over a bit more, having a little bit more bend in your hips, and you're just going to step to the side. You're not going to bring that foot all the way in. Step back just like that. Focus on keeping that tension, so you don't want to bring it all the way back where you lose tension. And now, since these are a band, you do want to do predominantly more reps on these, whereas with weights you can kind of do less reps. So something like this, maybe you want to focus on doing like 20 total and 10 each side, or anything up from there. You don't really want to do any bit less than that. So like 10 total is way too low. I like to do these two different types of variations where I'm going to be bent over and I'm going to be standing upright more, and doing with a heavier band. I'll do a little bit less reps, but still in that higher rep range, or I'll do a lighter band and do a lot higher reps. But I just did the bent over one, so now I'm going to stand up taller and I'm just going to step.
All right, I told you guys that was going to be a good one. Please like the video and subscribe to our channel if you're not subscribed already, and we'll catch you on the next video.
Move that really easy. 35.
No, I know, that's what I'm saying. It's the camera.
It's the camera.
Oh, doing the weight when the camera's not on, it's just like you're struggling so hard. It's like versus when the camera's on and you're just like repping it out. Because it's like so true, when the camera goes on, you're like,